Welcome to Undivided. I'm Brandi Kruse. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. Happy Monday to all of you. Remember, you can subscribe to the show and help support the show, help us continue to do the show for $5 a month if you enjoy it. You get a bonus episode just like this every single Wednesday. You can do that in two ways at patreon.com/undivided or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandycruz.locals.com. Coming up today, Bill Bryant, a Republican who ran for governor in Washington State in 2016, was defeated by current Governor Jay Inslee, is going to join me in studio for a lengthy conversation about something we've been discussing quite a bit, which is the state of the Republican Party and how it can continue to be competitive in a state like Washington that is very blue. And when you've seen sort of Republicans lose gains very steadily over a period of time. So I look forward to that conversation. Also, we're going to read at the end of the show, as we always do on Mondays, your reactions to a story we talked about quite a bit last week. And it was that insane story of a 27-time felon caught stealing from patients at Western State Hospital, where he was employed by the state of Washington, getting paid six figures. Not a surprise you guys have a lot to say about the government incompetence on that one. Also, some members of the mainstream media had eerily similar responses to the Twitter files, which was the release of internal deliberations at Twitter over the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020. And so, of course, we talked about this on the show Friday. Matt Taibbi, who's an independent journalist, was given access to some of these files from Elon Musk, and he detailed these internal deliberations. Well, there's some in the mainstream media and left political commentators who reacted to it basically just deflecting from the story. But it was interesting to hear their responses because it was almost like they had a script they were going. I don't believe in conspiracies, but it was like they all had either copied each other or they had this approved sort of talking point. It was very, very strange. You'll hear what I'm talking about. Also, Republicans threatening to hold up reauthorization of the National Defense Bill unless the mandate for service members to get the COVID-19 vaccine is removed. This is one of those stories where, I've had very strong opinions about the COVID-19 vaccine mandate in general. It's a little more complicated when it comes to the military, and so we'll discuss that a little bit. First, I wanted to start with a story today that has nothing to do with politics, but it's somehow controversial, and I just had to laugh at, I'm kind of glad that the controversial story of today wasn't about politics for a change, because it's sort of nice, but I've always had this. So I usually go to a local coffee shop, right? We have a couple in our city that, are easy to get to, that are locally owned, and everybody, and those are the ones I tend to go to. Occasionally, I will go to a Starbucks, and sometimes that's just convenient because they're absolutely everywhere. One of the things that bothers me, there's a couple things, but one of the things that bothers me about Starbucks is that they don't have an option to tip if you're paying with a card. And I don't carry cash. It drives my fiance crazy, but I never carry cash with me anywhere. It's 2022. I think a lot of people don't carry cash with them. And so, if I'm getting, a latte, something like that, I'm going to tip $1. That's what I usually tip at my locally owned coffee shops. But it was always freaking awkward at Starbucks when it's like, okay, I'm paying with a card, and I know you have a tip jar there, but I don't carry cash with me, so you don't get anything. Well, Starbucks is changing that, and you might have already noticed it. Now they're going to do what other places do, which is when you tip or when you buy with a card, it gives you an option to leave the barista a tip. You can pick $1, $2, or you can type in something that you want to do. Well, I had to laugh. There was all these news stories today. This one's titled, "Starbucks Fans Furious Over New Awkward Tipping System." Okay, this is from Fox 11 in Los Angeles. Starbucks recently rolled out a new tipping system that allows customers who are paying with a card to leave the barista a tip. The new system is ruffling feathers, with baristas saying that it is awkward to ask customers if they're choosing to leave a tip. The new tipping feature getting rolled out across North America prompts customers who paid by card to have the option to leave a $1, $2, or other amount or no tip after they've inserted their card to pay for their beverage or baked good. Everything, it's just funny to me that this is ruffling feathers and that this is now awkward and controversial. This is how every coffee shop I go to operates besides Starbucks. It's not like it's not like the barista is saying, would you like to tip me? It's just, it says it on the little pad right in front of you, and you hit the button. I mean, I don't see how that's any different than if you give or don't give them cash. It's way more awkward for me when I don't have an option to tip. And then I'm like, thank you. And then I walk away, and now I feel like a jerk. And I feel like they're going to be like, oh, Brandi Kruse was there today and she didn't tip me. So I just don't understand this. Like, would you rather get extra money or have it be a little awkward if you find that awkward? I mean, you can, if you're working as a barista, you can make a lot of money on tips. And you're just that like non-confrontational. Like, we put these young people in such safe spaces that they don't want to be in the presence of a card machine while someone is deciding whether they want to give you $1 or $2. It's just, I, for one, am very happy about this because I think it helps those of us who don't carry cash around. But I was just startled today by all these mainstream news stories about this, calling it awkward and controversial. This is nothing new, okay? Okay, I want to talk about the National Defense Bill reauthorization. So, of course, the Republicans won the House, and one of the things they're saying is that they are going to hold up reauthorization of the National Defense Bill if the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for service members isn't removed. Now, on its face, I agree with that, because I haven't agreed with COVID-19 vaccine mandates in general. But, there's this more kind of, I think, nuanced argument when it comes to members of the military. So, as you know, members of the military are already required to get a whole laundry list of vaccines if they want to serve the country. And those are not voluntary. I remember my friends saying, who were in the military, like they'd get like a bunch on one day and their arm would just be sore as hell. I pulled up a list of what's currently mandated of service members before they initially get into the armed services or go to basic training. And then there's some that you might be required to take as a member of the military, depending on exactly what you're going to be doing in the military. So just a couple of the ones that all service members are required to get: Hep A, Hep B, meningococcal, polio, tetanus, diphtheria, measles, mumps, rubella. So, I mean, those are some pretty tried and true vaccines, right? And then some of the ones that, depending on your job in the military, you might be required to get: anthrax, Japanese encephalitis, pneumococcal, rabies, smallpox, typhoid fever, yellow fever. Okay, so those are some serious things. So I do think there is a good argument to be made that vaccine requirements are absolutely part of being in the military, right? That being said, there's a couple things to weigh here, and a couple things I weighed when I'm deciding how do I feel about this. One is the COVID-19 vaccine comparable to these other vaccines and the mandate? It is true that the COVID-19 vaccine was really rushed through approval. We even found out in the last year or so, where there was like a movement away from the 2-shot vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson. There were some noted side effects. And so I think we're still learning a lot about the COVID-19 vaccine. And that has been one of the reasons that you've seen a lot of people be willing to lose their job to not take it, because they're like, look, I heard from mothers who were nursing or who were pregnant but still required to get it. And they're like, I'm just not going to take that risk because I just don't know. And so I think that is a legitimate argument to make about COVID-19. And also, is it going to be something that is still effective? We know that the virus has changed so significantly since those vaccines were developed. How quickly are they keeping up with that? And is it something in 2 to 3 years that members of the armed services would even need? My thought is you wait a few years, see how things shake out, and then decide whether you want to add it to the list. But the other issue here is readiness. So there is a readiness challenge with the U.S. Armed Forces, and that's something that's not in dispute. And there have been, some Marines who have spoken out and recruiters who have spoken out and said, look, the vaccine requirement, the COVID-19 vaccine mandate, is impacting our ability to recruit. It's impacting our ability to keep people in the armed services when their contracts come up. And that, to me, so I think you look at those two things and you weigh the risks and the rewards, right? And I think the risk of having a U.S. military that's not at a ready state, that's not up to where it should be in terms of personnel, is a much scarier proposition than having some folks in the military who aren't vaccinated against COVID-19, a virus that they can still spread to other members of the military and civilians who they might come into contact with, even if they are vaccinated. And frankly, a virus that's very, very unlikely to kill them if they get it. So that's what I'm weighing when I decide for myself, okay, is it really that big of a deal if they add another vaccine to the list of vaccines that members of the armed services already need to get? And I tend to agree with the Republican argument. For me, it's an issue of readiness. I'm not willing to sacrifice the readiness of our armed forces so that we can mandate a vaccine that these young, healthy men and women don't need. So that's where I stand on this. The Secretary of Defense has been in favor of the vaccine mandate, but, he works at the pleasure of the president. So I don't know if he's being honest about that. But the National Security Council spokesman, John Kirby, was asked about this, and he sort of punted to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. He said, Secretary Austin's been very clear that he opposes the repeal of the vaccine mandate, and the president actually concurs with the Secretary of Defense. He went on to say that Biden continues to believe that all Americans, including those in the armed forces, should be vaccinated and boosted for COVID-19. Vaccines are saving lives, including our men and women in uniform. But again, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, soon maybe to be the Speaker of the House, apparently that's still being sorted out, said that this is something that Republicans feel like they're going to hold firm on, or the defense spending bill isn't going to move anywhere.
So just to be clear, you're saying in the NDAA, which will drop next week, the vaccine mandate for the military will be lifted?
Yes, it will. Otherwise, the bill will not move. I've been very clear with the president. The president, worked with me on this. This is the first sign of having divided government. You got some compromise here, and we've got something that the Republicans have been working very hard, and a number of Democrats too, trying to find success, but one-party rule would never allow that to go forward, and now we're going to have success.
So we'll see what happens with that. I tend to agree with the Republicans on this one. I don't know if you hold up the whole defense spending bill. I don't know what other sort of leverage you would have, though. I tend to agree with the sentiment, though, that military readiness is more important than a military that's fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Okay, on Friday's show, we talked about the Twitter files. So Elon Musk had said he was going to release internal deliberations in the interest of restoring public trust. He was going to release internal deliberations that happened at Twitter in 2020 over whether to basically spike the New York Post's exclusive on the Hunter Biden laptop story. If you recall back to that time, you couldn't even share the link to that story on Twitter, either publicly or in private DMs. Sometimes your account would be locked if you did. You could be suspended if you did, if you tried to find a workaround. So Twitter completely decided to lock it down. And what Elon Musk did is he released, quote unquote, the Twitter files to independent journalist Matt Taibbi, who he's an independent journalist who does a Substack, which is basically like what I do, but just a different platform. And so he released sort of some details that showed these internal deliberations at Twitter. By any standard, it's significant. By any standard, that's an important news story. By any standard, that's information the public deserves to know. You had this really controversial thing that one of the most powerful, influential social media platforms in the world decided to do in the lead up to the 2020 election, something that could have impacted the outcome of the election. And that story was suffocated out by Twitter. So regardless of what the quote unquote Twitter files or the internal deliberations would have shown, it's a relevant story. It's important for the public to know. And I agree with Elon Musk in order to rebuild trust. Now, what the internal stuff from Matt Taibbi showed is that basically there was some disagreement within Twitter as to whether they were standing on solid ground when it came to their decision to suppress the story based on the fact that they thought possibly the story could have been the result of hacked material, which they didn't know. They were just kind of guessing, and it was like, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to suppress this story. So I could not help but notice, and I posted this on the Sunday newsletter I put out every week, but I just had to go over it today because, so Mediaite, which covers the press, compiled some reactions from essentially left-wing or even Democrat talking heads on Twitter, right? And overwhelmingly, they had the same reactions to Matt Taibbi being given this information to put out about this Twitter drama. And it was almost like they were either all copying the same talking point, or I don't know, because it's so odd. So Mediaite puts out this article. It's called "The 27 Most Embarrassing Reactions to Taibbi Thread About Twitter Censoring Hunter Biden." So a couple of the tweets that they list in this, and these are all from like left-wing talking heads, basically. Ben Collins, imagine throwing it all away to do PR work for the richest person in the world. Humiliating shit. Chris Hayes said, watching some of the most famous, most powerful, and richest men red pill themselves into disaster. Pretty wild. Mehdi Hassan, imagine volunteering to do online PR work for the world's richest man on a Friday night. Elias Sepata, watching Matt's unbelievable fall into lazy reactionary commentator and now PR hand for the world's richest man is depressing. Simon Owens, from calling Goldman Sachs a vampire squid to giving free PR to the world's richest billionaire, man, what a career journey. Jason Schreier, hold on, I just closed it. Stop, my computer keeps closing this. Jason Schreier, he retweets Matt Taibbi's reporting and says, this thread should be taught in journalism school as evidence of the importance of editors. Editors are great, not just because they make your work sharper, but because you can ask them things like, hey, should I be doing PR work for the richest man on the planet? And then here's this one. I don't know how to say this person's first name. Wajahat Ali, just another Twitter blue check. Matt Taibbi, what a sad, disgraceful downfall. I swear, kids, he did good work back in the day. Should be a cautionary tale for everyone. Selling your soul for the richest white nationalist on earth. Jason Wilson, I know he's telling you what you want to hear, but that doesn't change the fact that he's working PR for one of the richest men in the world. Ross McCafferty, it was handed to him so he could do PR for the world's richest man. Sarah Reese-Jones, we don't perform as a PR person to the richest man on the planet. I mean, this just keeps going on. John Kneffel, the Taibbi thread is a great example of overwriting when you don't have the goods, but you don't want to admit you're just doing PR for the world's richest person. I mean, these they're all the same. Making a deal to do PR for the richest man in the world in exchange for exposure. This is fascinating to me. How does that all happen? Tom Scora. 1 minute you're scourging Goldman Sachs, the next you're doing PR for the richest man in the world. This is fascinating to me. It's all the same. All of the reactions to this are the same, and they're all just deflecting. They're all just deflecting from the story, and no one wants to talk about the story on the merits. There is so much for any free-thinking journalist or political talking head on Twitter to really have a thoughtful conversation, which I think we had a thoughtful conversation about it on Friday, about the information that Matt Taibbi put out and what story it tells. To me, it does tell me that there was internal disagreement at Twitter, that there were some people at Twitter who didn't think it was right that the Hunter Biden laptop story was being suppressed, and they were trying to speak up about it. We also learned from the Matt Taibbi thread that sometimes these decisions were being made without approval or oversight from the highest up people at Twitter. But we also learned some really, I think, things that should be concerning to any journalist who values the First Amendment, who values the role of oversight that the media should play. You know, for instance, one of the things exposed in the Taibbi thread was in the Twitter files was that you'd often have Biden's team or the Democratic National Committee exchanging emails directly with people at Twitter and sending them links to tweets they wanted taken down. Now, that didn't mean Twitter was going to turn around and automatically take those down, but you had this direct pipeline, this direct access for politicians and political arms to say, hey, we don't like these tweets. And sometimes the tweets they sent were from, really influential people. So if you're on the left or the right, you ought to be able to look at the stuff that came out in the Twitter files and have some thoughtful things to say about it. Have some analysis that can bring something to the conversation. Instead, you have all these talking heads, political pundits on Twitter, these blue check marks on the left who are like, oh, you're just doing PR for the world's richest man. Well, who are you freaking doing PR for then? Biden? Hunter Biden? Who are you doing PR for that you would ignore the Hunter Biden story and not look at it with a critical eye at all in 2020, which now, a couple years later, some mainstream outlets have confirmed that it was indeed true, and that you won't just look at these Twitter files and explain to people what did and did not come out of them. So you're accusing Matt Taibbi of doing PR for Elon Musk, but I'm curious who you think you're doing PR for. Because y'all have to be doing PR for someone, for all of your responses to be nearly identical. The following segment is brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. I got a nice visit in the studio today from, if you live in Washington, someone who will be a familiar name and face, Bill Bryant. He ran for governor in 2016. Against Jay Inslee and lost. It was a difficult year, I think, for Republicans in Washington state because you had Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, and in a state where you have a blue state, first of all, and then where you have even a lot of Republicans who didn't like Donald Trump. Certainly that brought down other Republicans on the ticket, like Bill Bryant, but he wrote an op-ed recently in the Tacoma News Tribune that talked about some of the things he thinks the Republican Party needs to do moving forward, like in Washington state, separating itself from Donald Trump, like taking action to protect privacy and therefore protect the right to abortion. And so I had him into the studio this morning. We taped a lengthy conversation. Here's part of it. For people who are not familiar with you, give us the Cliff Notes.
The Cliff Notes. I was born in Morton, which is at the base of Mount Rainier, grew up over on the Olympic Peninsula in Hoodsport on Hood Canal. Grew up hiking in the Olympic Mountains. Went to high school in Olympia. Went back east to college, but moved back home as soon as I graduated. And have built a company over the last 30 years, which I sold in July. So I guess now I'm retired.
Congratulations.
And along the way, I ran for a seat on the Seattle Port Commission, was elected the only Republican elected in King County, countywide, and then ran for governor in 2016 against Jay Inslee.
Yeah. What does retirement look like?
I love it. It looks like, okay.
I've been retired. Retirement? Okay.
Yeah, I've been retired for, a few months. And a lot of those were in the summer. So there was fly fishing, there was hiking, there was a bit of sailing. I just got back from about a week trip in the backcountry of the Grand Canyon, doing hiking and climbing into areas into the wilderness where, the ranger, when you get your permit, says, okay, you understand your 24 hours from rescue if it's coming at all. And I just loved it. It's so spectacular.
So would you say you're not, a lot of people retire and then I feel like they're just as busy as they were when they were working. Are you kind of keeping your hand in anything political or any sort of quote unquote work?
Yes. I'm writing a lot. And as you know, I have a column in the TNT, which is supposed to be monthly, but I just realized it's kind of slipped into every 6 weeks a few times. And I also have a column in the Spokane Inlander. So those two columns, as you can appreciate, actually the writing of it is pretty easy. Deciding what I'm going to write about is much more of a chore. What's interesting enough that people will care enough about to read, that I find more difficult. But I'm doing some writing. And yes, I have a PAC called Forge, which helps people get elected to city and county positions. It's only on local races. And we are coming up on an off-year election where we'll have city and county races. So we're beginning to look at that. And then this past cycle, I did endorse and did a little bit of fundraising for some legislative candidates.
What kind of candidates does your PAC typically support? Like, who are you looking to throw support behind usually?
We're looking for people who are in swing districts. So we're not looking at people, who are in solid Republican districts and are going to win. We're looking for people in swing districts. They tend to be in Snohomish and King County suburbs. Most recently, we've been focused almost entirely. Well, the last cycle we were focused entirely in Snohomish County, and they were all kind of running through to make sure this is correct, but they were all city council races.
Okay.
And we're looking for people who are ready to govern.
That's easy.
We're not looking for people who are doing this because they want to get their name out there, or people who have some grievance and some axe to grind. We're looking for people who understand that at the county and city level, what we need are competent people who want to govern and who want to listen and learn. And if they have those qualities and they want to come talk to me, I'll talk to them.
Are those easy candidates to find?
There are more people like that than you know. But unfortunately, there is no real support system for them. I think that the Democrats, particularly when Frank Chopp was Speaker of the House and the legislature, did a very good job of going out and finding qualified people who identified with the Democrat Party and getting them elected to a city or a county position and get them some experience. And then he would probably keep in touch with them and someday talk to them about running for the legislature. Republicans don't do that. And if, I just care about local government. I started my political career in local government. I actually understand that a great deal gets done at local government that affects people's daily lives. And we need competent people there. And if it has the extra advantage of building a farm team, well, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. The bench isn't very deep for Republicans. And I know there's some efforts underway to sort of try to
Yes.
try to build that bench up. But also, do sane people want to run for politics right now?
It's really ugly. People talk to me about running again. And I'm like, it's ugly out there. And it's not just ugly for the candidate. I'm a big boy and I've got pretty thick skin, but it's ugly for your family.
Yeah.
And we live in an environment with this social media where it is very difficult to ever turn it off and separate yourself from it. You and your family are constantly being barraged unless you really do just turn it off, which I tend to do. But for people who are sane, who have lives, who have families, putting themselves out in this ugly environment is a even more difficult decision than it would be normally. But there are people who are willing to do it. And we have to. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
Yeah.
It only works when you get in and work it. And if you say, you know what, I got a life, I don't need this, and you walk off the field, then you're ceding it to all the yahoos who decide to stay on the field. And a lot of people aren't ready to cede the field to the crazies.
So I'll talk about 2024, but first I want to go back to 2016. This sounds like a very blunt question, but what is it like
Really, you're going to ask a blunt question?
What is it like to lose to Jay Inslee?
Oh.
Is it terrible? You're one of only a few people who know, and I'm assuming you and I share the same opinion of him, give or take.
Yeah, I've known the governor a long time because we both lived in Yakima at the same time. Barbara and I lived in Yakima for 7 years when I did international trade work for the fruit industry, and he was the state legislator from there, and then for one term, the congressman. What is it like to lose to him? It's sad, but not in a sad. The sadness I felt was not, oh, I'm sad I lost. It was really, and I think Barbara would feel this way too. It was really because our lives will go on, and I had the company, and we got other things we can do. But it was a sadness at the opportunity lost.
Yeah.
Because this state is an incredible state with incredible potential that we are not realizing. And the fact that we were going to turn this state over to him for 4 more years of, at best, treading water, maybe on some important things going backwards. And it's not what he does so much, although I disagree with stuff that he does. It's what he doesn't do. And there are so many opportunities we could be seizing to move this state forward that we're just not. And so I think that the opportunity lost, what we weren't going to be doing because he was reelected, was the sadness.
How much of it was him winning on his merits versus just him winning because he's a Democrat?
Oh, in 2016, most of it was him winning because he was a Democrat.
Because Trump was on the ticket.
Because Trump was on the ticket. In January of 2016, I mean, and I'm going to get this wrong. Frankly, you and I are talking about this more than I've thought about it in a while. But if I think I'm right. In January of 16, Stu Elway came out with a poll that roughly showed Jay Inslee at, let's call it 38%, and Bill Bryant at like 32, 34, and like 30 some undecided, right? Something like that. Jay was in the high 30s, I was in the low 30s, and like the rest were undecided. And I was like, damn, game on.
Yeah.
I mean, we got an incumbent who's not only under 50, he's under 40.
Yeah.
And people didn't even really know me then, and I had over a third that wanted to support me. So we were very confident. We had a very really strong fundraising effort in February, March, maybe early April. But I remember the day that not Tom Cruise, the other Cruise.
Why are you thinking of Tom Cruise?
Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz. Those are very different Cruises,
people, yes.
and I am also a different Cruz.
Right. Ted Cruz and Rubio and a few other candidates all dropped out within like 2 or 3 days of each other.
Yeah.
And our fundraising just dried up. A lot of people just said, well, we're out of here. And then we kind of came back. And at the end of June, there was a poll that put us really within striking distance. We were in, I think, somewhere in the mid 40s or something like that. And then after the Republican convention, you could just see it starting to drop on the suburbs of King County.
Yeah. I don't recall the time you and I were discussing before we started how that was kind of when I was just switching over to covering politics full time. Did you come out forcefully against Trump while you were running?
I did, but I didn't feel I needed to get up every morning and remind everyone of that and
Yes.
talk about that, because that's all Jay wanted to talk about and all the media wanted to talk
all
about.
he still wants to talk about.
Right. In January of 16, before any of the presidential primaries, I made it clear that I did not think that Mr. Trump was competent to be president of the United States. I wanted to focus on issues that were important to the governor's race and Washington. And I thought the more I talked about whether I liked Trump or not, the more I was playing into Jay Inslee's game plan.
Yeah.
And the media was perfectly willing to play into Jay Inslee's game plan. I remember one time a TV reporter came and said, Bill, I want to do a piece on education reform. And my producer or whatever is giving me X number of minutes, which was a lot of minutes. Call it 3 or 4, I don't know. But it was as much as you're going to get on the evening news. And I knew that Jay would get part of it, so maybe I've got 1.5, 2 minutes, still a lot on the evening news. And we probably talked for 20 minutes about how this state needs to ensure that every kid, regardless of where they grow up, has an equal education, and that we don't. And even after Jay's Band-Aid on McCleary, we still don't. But it was a thoughtful conversation about education reform. And at the very end, he said, oh, and do you have anything more to say about, Trump? And I can't remember what I said, but that was the only piece of the whole interview he used.
Wow.
So the media played into that game plan as well.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult because I wanted to talk about issues that really affected the lives of people all across the state. And too many people just wanted to talk about the Clinton-Trump race.
Yeah. So would you rule out running for governor again?
Show me how we win.
So you wouldn't rule it out, but if you felt like you wouldn't rule it out is what I'm hearing.
Well, I'm
if
too
you
young
knew
to
you could
rule
win.
anything out, but that don't twist that around, because that's a long way from
Yeah.
saying I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. But I'm sure people still bring it up to you.
Oh yeah.
When you saw Lauren Kolb become the party's nominee in 2020, I mean, and he did very poorly. I mean, as someone who came closer than that and who is inarguably more qualified, I mean, was it hard to see? And I'm not trying to Lauren Culp is not my type of political candidate, but he's always been pleasant to me. And so I certainly don't want to speak poorly about him as a person. But was it hard to see that be the person that the party put up against Jay in a third term?
I don't know if it was hard or if I even thought about it that way. I did think that once it happened, this was probably a good exercise for the Washington State Republican Party to go through. Not because I thought he had any chance of winning, which he didn't. But at least there were, and unfortunately there probably still are some people who said, I would have won if I were more Trumpy, if I'd embraced Trump, even though president nominee candidate Trump in 2016 got 30% of the vote in Washington State. I mean, I got in the 40s. But that I needed to support Trump more. I need to be angrier. I needed to, kind of shout and be more dramatic, and I needed to be more Trumpy, and I need to be a hell of a lot more conservative. Although I don't quite know what that means because I think of myself as a true conservative, at least. Well, they got that, so it's like, okay, if I'm on a dial of 1 to 10 and I was at a 6, you got your guy at 9 or 10 right now. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
And we saw how it went.
Yeah.
So are you going to say, well, he should have been more Trumpy? I mean, I hope that people will take a lesson away from that, but I'm not sure that they have, because there are some people in the state who think that the reason why the Republicans didn't do better in this last election is that they were not mad enough.
Yeah, they're not aggressive enough. And I will say, there is a certain part of me, I don't think it has to do with being mad. There is a certain part of me that just looks at the way both sides campaign, and Democrats do it so much better. I mean, Democrats define Republicans out the gate. I feel like Republicans are always on the defensive. And so I would like to see them be not madder, but more aggressive in countering some of those Democratic narratives that I didn't think were fair.
I do too. I think we have to be much more aggressive. One of the reasons why we didn't do better in this most recent election is I don't think people fully appreciate what the Republican Party stands for. Okay. We didn't have a platform in the last national election. It was kind of like, well, whatever he says, we agree with.
Yeah.
And that's not a platform, and it's not sustainable. You need to tell people what you believe in and go out and defend it and brand yourself. Don't let them brand you.
Yeah.
And until we get there, and you can't brand yourself unless you know what you believe in, but until we get there, they're going to continue to paint us whatever the color paint they want to put on.
What do you think? I know you can't broad brush the entire party, but how truly do you think the Washington State Republican Party compares to the National Party? Not how you think they should brand themselves, but who is the Washington GOP, in your opinion?
I don't know. Is it the state party chair? I don't think he sees himself as being sort of the image of the party, and rightfully so. Is it the legislative leaders? We have great legislative leaders in Representative Braun, or State Senator Braun, and J.T. Wilcox, State Representative Wilcox. But I don't know if they see themselves as the flag bearers of the overall party.
But even not your standard bearer, but if you could say this is sort of the quintessential Washington State Republican, even if it's a manufactured person, who is that person?
I don't know. The Republican Party right now is a coalition of a lot of different groups. You have people who are more recently come to the party who are supporters of the former president, who might not have been very involved before, but have become more involved since. They don't necessarily have any attachment to the older party or what they would label the establishment. Then you have that older party, that establishment, which is made up of true conservative voters who are concerned about the direction of our state. Then you've got kind of the what some would brand as the mainstream, more moderate group, which
Yeah.
for a long time when I was growing up was the Republican Party in Washington State. Is there someone who can bridge that rural, urban, that conservative, and that mainstream coalition? I don't know who that person is.
So even if, let's just say, you're not going to run in 2024, you can't think of someone right now who you think would be the best option.
Well, I don't want to throw out anybody's name if they're not thinking about
Please,
doing it. That's
throw out
not
their
fair.
name.
No, 'cause people throw out my name all the time, and then your phone starts ringing. It's like, I didn't say that. He said
So
that.
there are some people in your noggin, but you don't want to talk. You don't want.
Oh,
to
there's
mention
one
them.
person who I think would be very good.
What if I guess it on the first try?
You can't.
You don't think I would?
Oh, you might be able to, but I'm not going to tell you whether you're right
Dave
or not.
Reichert?
Oh, I was not thinking of Congressman Reichert. I don't want to speak for Dave, but I don't think so.
Okay. I'll ponder. For the presidency in 2024, you and I are both in agreement that Trump.
Time to move on.
It's been time to move on.
If we didn't have enough reason to move on, his statement regarding suspending the Constitution should be cause for everyone to say it's time for him to move on.
Yeah. Let's talk about the most recent op-ed you did for the Tacoma News Tribune. What do you think is the most effective way? If the Washington State Republican Party says, yes, we agree, this is in the best interest of our success and our viability moving into 2024, how do you think that they make that clear distinction? What form should that take? Do they come out and do a press conference? Do they just passively distance themselves from him?
No, I think they need to let voters know that the party is moving on. In my op-ed in Sunday's Tacoma News Tribune, I suggested that the state party write a letter to the former president of Mar-a-Lago and just publicly say that we acknowledge your service as being president for 4 years and want you to know that in Washington State, we will be looking for a different nominee in 2024.
Do you have somebody in mind who you think would be a good Republican nominee?
I don't. There are a lot of people on the field. Not all of them have been tested nationally. Not all of them represent a constituency that necessarily can be nationalized.
Who are you referring to?
Well, I mean, I don't. People are very kind of bullish on DeSantis right now, and this is nothing against Governor DeSantis at all. But any governor of Florida or Texas, I think, is going to struggle to take that persona and nationalize it.
Interesting.
Iowa is not Florida. Washington State is not
Nowhere
Florida.
is Florida. Florida is Florida.
So, that doesn't mean he can't, but
Yeah.
it means you can't just be the same kind of person and expect it to play in Michigan or Ohio or in New Mexico or in Nevada, states you need to pick up. Doesn't mean you can't do it. I just haven't seen that pivot yet. And that would be true for some other governors who are looking at it. And if you want to look on the other side, that would be true of Governor Hogan or former Governor Hogan in Maryland. What works in Maryland might not work in Nevada. And running for president requires someone who can pivot and position themselves so that they appeal to voters beyond their normal base in their own state.
Yeah, I like Governor Hogan. I wrote an op-ed saying I'd like him and then to run with a VP is Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, who I'm just thoroughly impressed by. But I do agree that I wonder if Governor Hogan has like the fortitude to sort of drive the message home, but we'll see. I mean, it sounds like he's going to get in. In 2024, again, there are some Democrats that we know are going to run for governor. Bob Ferguson, Dow Constantine, Hillary Franz. Do any of those particularly worry you, where you would think the state will go in a poor direction if that's the person we go with?
Well, and I think one of the best things about Governor Inslee, at least in my opinion, is that doesn't work real hard at getting a lot done. And
It was very, I could tell you wanted to word that another way, but
But those candidates that you mentioned, at least two of the three, will work hard to get things done. And it may not be some of the things that we would like to see get done. So
Who of the three would not work hard to get things done?
I'll let you figure that one out.
Why you can't just drop that stuff and then expect me to figure out who you think is lazy of the three of them.
Lazy. I just think two of them are pretty damn Energizer bunnies.
I mean,
And there's if we tread water under Jay, that may be better than swimming backwards. And I think we might swim backwards under some of those candidates.
we will have the second half of that interview on the subscriber-only episode on Wednesday, so make sure to tune in to that. The previous segment was brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. One of the things that you heard Bill Bryant mention was this post from Donald Trump that's getting a lot of attention today. I try not to cover every little tiny thing Donald Trump does, but since Bill Bryant brought it up, and since it's fairly significant, I thought I would mention it. So on Truth Social, as he often does, Donald Trump posted something that has everyone in a little bit of a flurry. And I would think that even the most diehard constitutional conservatives would have a problem with this. So he posted it first 2 days ago, but then he reshared his own post. He said, so with the revelation of massive and widespread fraud and deception in working closely with big tech companies, the DNC and the Democrat Party, referring to the Twitter files, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections. So obviously it's that suspension of certain rules in the Constitution that has understandably a lot of people being like, are Republicans going to still stand behind this guy? And then he came out today and tried to gaslight people into thinking he never said that, even though it's still posted on his page. He said, the fake news is actually trying to convince the American people that I said I want to terminate the Constitution. That is simply more disinformation and lies, just like Russia, 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 But he did say that, in his opinion, the fraud and deception in 2020 was so severe that it allows for the, quote, termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. So that's what Bill Bryant was referencing, in case you had not heard about it. And look, I think that Donald Trump isn't doing himself any favors. It's already very clear to me that there's a big chunk of the Republican Party, I've heard from a lot of you, that want to move on from him. And when you're saying wild stuff like suspending rules and articles in the Constitution, I'm not sure that you're winning any people to your cause at this juncture. Okay, a follow-up on the Balenciaga bondage bears story. As you recall, Balenciaga, the fashion brand, did this weird shoot where it had children holding backpacks, like the teddy bear backpacks with weird sex bondage on them. And then there was, like, in one of the shots, if you looked really close, some sort of court document related to child pornography, like weird stuff. So the Balenciaga creative director is finally speaking out about this, because there's been like some finger pointing. Balenciaga's like, oh, we hired a team to handle this shoot and we had no idea this is what would be in it, which is just bullshit, right? Like, they're just trying to preserve their brand. They filed a lawsuit against the designers claiming, like, I'm sorry, when you're a brand as big as Balenciaga, you don't just like hand creative control over to an outside company and then step away and let them post it on your social media without approval. That's ridiculous. It's just like stupid. But we hadn't heard from the creative director for Balenciaga, who is actually friends with Kim Kardashian. So she is obviously a face of Balenciaga. So he waited a week and then he weighed in on it. He said, I want to personally apologize for the wrong artistic choice of concept for the gifting campaign with the kids, and I take my responsibility. It was inappropriate to have kids promote objects that had nothing to do with them, which is true, especially if they're promoting objects that are sexual in nature. That's weird. He went on to say, as much as I would sometimes like to provoke a thought through my work, I would never have an intention to do that with such an awful subject as child abuse that I condemn, period. I need to learn from this, listen and engage with child protection organizations to know how I can contribute and help on this terrible subject. He wrote in conclusion, I apologize to anyone offended by the visuals, and Balenciaga has guaranteed that adequate measures will be taken not only to avoid similar mistakes in the future, but also to take accountability in protecting child welfare in every way we can. I think that's an appropriate apology, where he's, not making excuses. I do have to question, though, when he says, I need to learn from this, listen and engage with child protection organizations to know how I can contribute and help on this terrible subject. Do you really need to engage with organizations that work to prevent the exploitation of children to know that it's wrong to have children pose with teddy bears in sexual bondage? Do you really need to be enlightened as to the error of your ways? It's just like, this one continues to be a very hard one for me to grasp, how this could have got through all the layers that it had to get through from conception to when it was finally published. And for you to say, like, I need to listen and engage with child protection organizations. Like, yeah, but you also, I think, need a little bit of common sense. If you don't understand, and if you didn't understand as this was all happening, why you shouldn't have kids pose with bondage teddy bears. Okay, by far our most commented on story from the podcast last week was this story. We had the Tacoma News Tribune reporter who broke it on the show a week ago, and it was about this 27-time felon who the state employed, paying six figures to work with mentally vulnerable patients at the state psychiatric hospital. Okay. And then he was stealing from those patients, didn't even get fired for it, didn't face charges or arrest or anything. So I just want to read a couple of your comments. Let's see. Alan says, somebody higher up needs to go to jail. Unbelievable. I don't know if there's a crime against that, but you'd at least think some heads would roll. I guess the former head of that hospital had since retired, so kind of got off the hook easy. Donna says, yep. I got fired for being unvaxxed. Maybe I should have been a 27-time felon instead. Very good point. Linda says, unbelievable. This, in a nutshell, is our state government way to vote people. Gary, that's how messed up our state is. There are so many other instances that plague the hardworking people of this state. Let's see. Neil, and that's why we moved. Zero accountability and backward policies, or priorities, rather. Okay, let me know. Just another day in Washington. Steve said, and this is a point that a couple people brought up, but let me read Steve's comment. It's all in the name of equity, Brandi Kruse. So I had a couple people ask if I thought that this guy, Mark James, got to keep his job and had so much leeway because he was black. I'm going to say that that's a definitive possibility. I mean, certainly the state has said that it wants, doesn't mind hiring felons. So, there's a review process to go through that. And I don't disagree with that. I don't think a felony should preclude you from doing anything productive or meaningful with the rest of your life. But I also know, and we've seen this in the city of Seattle, that there are these equity efforts that to me can amount to discrimination against white people. And there's an ongoing civil lawsuit, federal civil rights lawsuit about this in Seattle. I have nothing to prove, Steve, that he was given so much leeway because of the color of his skin. It wouldn't surprise me based on other things that have happened in Washington state and some of these efforts at equity and inclusion that I think go so far in the wrong direction. We had a country for so many decades and at our founding that discriminated against people on the basis of race. And then I think, for much of the last 20 years, things were so much better in the United States. We should have been so proud of our progress as a country. And now it's like, nope, that progress isn't enough. Now we're going to go too far in the other direction. It's just wild to me. All right, that's it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. If you've not taken it already, for Undivided subscribers, I posted on Patreon a little survey I'm hoping you'll take as we look to how we're going to expand, how we're going to grow in the new year. For folks who watch or listen on Locals, you'll have your own survey coming soon. And then I'm also going to put out a survey. These are really quick. They're like 5 to 10 questions, multiple choice, for non-subscribers who still watch the show on Mondays and Fridays, just to kind of see, what we might be able to do or add to get you to subscribe at that $5 a month price point and help us grow this mission, because we really do rely on subscribers to be able to continue to grow and to do more shows, hopefully, in the new year. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see all of you subscribers on Wednesday.